they wanted me to flip my last burger on camera. My son Julian, the TV star chef with his Michelin dreams, had arranged the whole thing, a farewell special where he'd expose my primitive cooking methods to his 4 million followers. He was building his case, frame by frame, proving that Gordon Blackwood's name didn't belong on his empire anymore. What he didn't know was that every restaurant in his group, every trademark, every recipe he claimed as his own, it all ran through a trust I'd established 30 years ago. He wasn't erasing me from his brand. He was performing his own execution. The flat top at Rosie's Diner had been mine since 1991. Cast iron surface, 3 feet wide, seasoned black from decades of rendered fat. I knew every cold spot, every zone that ran hot when the gas kicked in unevenly. Tuesday lunch rush, 11:30 in the morning, and I had 4 burgers working, quarter-pounders on the left where the heat stayed steady, bacon crisping on the right edge where it got mean. The exhaust fan overhead rattled like it had since Clinton's first term. Grease vapor hung in the air, mixing with coffee that had been sitting in the carafe since 9. My hands moved without thought. Spatula in my right, tongs in my left, flipping, pressing, scraping. The muscle memory of 43 years. My lower back had that deep ache that started around 10 every morning, the kind that settled into your vertebrae and didn't leave until you laid down at night. Knees stiff. Shoulder tight from the repetitive motion. I was 65 years old and my body kept a detailed record of every burger I'd ever flipped. The door chimed. I looked up from the grill and saw Julian walk in with an entourage. 5 people. Maybe 6. A kid in his 20s carried a camera rig, one of those shoulder-mounted setups with a monitor bolted to the side. Another one had a boom microphone on a pole. Julian wore a suit, charcoal gray, tailored so precisely it looked like it had been painted onto his frame. His shoes were leather, polished to a gloss that caught the diner's fluorescent lights. He smiled with his television face, the one I'd watched him develop over the past 8 years as his show climbed the ratings. Behind him, a woman in a black blazer carried a tablet. A man with wireframe glasses held a leather notebook, the expensive kind with the elastic band. I set my spatula down on the steel counter beside the grill. Wiped my hands on my apron. The apron was white cotton, or it had been white maybe 15 years ago. Now it was gray with permanent grease stains and a burn hole near the bottom hem where I'd caught an ember from the grill. It had Rosie stitched in red thread across the chest, cursive letters that were fraying at the edges. Dad. Julian's voice carried that particular tone. The one he used when he was performing for someone else. We need to talk. I turned off the front 2 burners. The bacon could wait. Sure, I said. The camera's red light was already on. Recording. The kid with the rig positioned himself to catch both of us in frame, Julian in his expensive suit, me in my stained apron and work boots that were older than most of his staff. This is Sarah from Eater, Julian said, gesturing to the woman with the tablet. Marcus from the Times food section. And Dev is documenting the Blackwood legacy for a feature series we're producing. Sarah smiled with professional warmth. The kind of smile you practice. Marcus opened his notebook, pen already moving. Dev adjusted his camera angle, the lens swinging toward me like a surveillance device. I thought it would be powerful to show where the Blackwood brand started, Julian continued. Where you still work every day, making burgers the old-fashioned way. His emphasis on old-fashioned landed like a diagnosis. I nodded. Didn't speak. Gordon still uses intuition instead of precision temperature control, Julian told the camera. No sous vide, no documented systems. It's authentic, but it's not scalable. It's not the future. My jaw tightened. I felt it in my molars, the pressure building where I clenched my teeth. My hands stayed loose at my sides, but my shoulders had gone rigid. I focused on my breathing. In through my nose, out through my mouth. The same way I'd learned to control my temper during contract negotiations with developers who thought they could lowball me because I showed up in work clothes. Sarah asked questions. How long have you been cooking, Gordon? Do you think traditional methods still have a place in modern dining? Have you kept up with food safety regulations? I answered in short sentences. 43 years. Yes. I follow the health code. My voice stayed flat, empty of emotion. I wasn't giving them the reaction they wanted. Julian pulled out a folder. Placed it on the stainless steel prep counter between us. The folder was manila, new, crisp edges. Inside I could see the header of a legal document. Morrison and Hawk, attorneys at law. Dad, I've been working with the board. We think it's time to transition the brand identity. He opened the folder so the camera could catch the paperwork. These are preliminary agreements for what we're calling legacy transition and executive restructuring. The words were corporate language. Sanitized. What they meant was erasing my name from everything I'd built and letting him sell it to the highest bidder. When do you need an answer? I asked. The board meets Friday. Julian's eyes were bright with something that might have been excitement or might have been cruelty. It was hard to tell the difference anymore. We're meeting with Consolidated Hospitality Group. They're prepared to make an offer, but they want a clean narrative. No confusion about who's running the brand. I looked at the papers without touching them. The top sheet had signature lines. Places where I was supposed to sign away 40 years of work. I'll think about it, I said. Julian's smile widened. Take your time, Dad. But the meeting is in 3 days. We need to know where you stand. They left at 12:17. I watched through the diner's front window as they climbed into a black SUV, one of those luxury models with the badge on the front grille. The camera kid was already reviewing footage on his monitor, probably selecting the shots where I looked most confused, most obsolete, most ready to be discarded. The documentarian's angle had been calculated. Julian in sharp focus, commanding the frame. Me in soft focus behind the grille, a relic from another era. I locked the front door and flipped the sign to closed. Walked back through the narrow kitchen to the storage room that doubled as an office. 8 feet by 10 feet. Metal desk I'd bought used in 1987 for $200. Filing cabinet with a broken lock. A calendar on the wall from 2023 that I'd never bothered to replace. I pulled out my laptop from the bottom desk drawer. It was newer than anything else in the building, a model I'd bought 2 years ago specifically for maintaining the architecture that Julian had apparently forgotten existed. I opened the encrypted folder. Blackwood Family Holdings. The trust documents I'd established in 1996 filled the screen. The structure was simple. Elegant. Blackwood Brand Holdings owned 100% of the trademark. Every recipe, every logo, every piece of intellectual property that Julian's restaurants used. I was the sole managing member. Blackwood Family Trust owned 68% of the common stock in Blackwood Restaurant Group, the parent company Julian ran. I was the trustee with absolute authority until my death. Julian owned 32%. He'd earned that equity through good work, expanding from 4 locations to 17 over the past decade. I was proud of what he'd built. But he'd forgotten the foundation. Every restaurant operated under licensing agreements that required annual payments of 6% of gross revenue to Blackwood Brand Holdings. My wholly owned entity. Last year that had generated $3.8 million in fees that flowed into accounts Julian never saw. The laptop screen glowed in the dim office. My hands were steady now. The tightness in my jaw had released. I wasn't angry. Anger was inefficient. I was calculating. Julian had just committed his first irreversible error. He documented his intentions on camera, with witnesses, with legal paperwork that demonstrated his plan to remove me from the brand. He'd created evidence. A timestamp. Proof that would matter later when this ended the only way it could. I opened my email and found the message from my daughter Rebecca that had arrived 4 days ago. Dad, Julian called asking about your mental state and whether you'd been keeping up with business complexity. He wanted to know if I'd support a competency evaluation. I told him to go to hell, but you should know what he's planning. The pattern was clear now. The documentary wasn't about legacy. It was evidence for a competency challenge. The board meeting wasn't about brand evolution. It was about forcing me out before I understood what was happening. And the Consolidated Hospitality deal would erase the Blackwood name entirely, probably netting Julian somewhere around $36 million based on his minority stake. He'd researched this. Planned it. Brought witnesses and cameras to document my supposed decline. What he hadn't researched was the corporate structure that made all of it impossible. I closed the laptop and sat in the dim office, listening to the building settle around me. The refrigerator compressor kicked on in the kitchen. The ventilation fan rattled. Outside, traffic moved past on the county road, the sound of engines dopplering away into nothing. My son was trying to destroy me. And he'd just given me everything I needed to stop him. I didn't go home that night. Home was a 3-bedroom house in Tacoma that still had Julian's high school graduation photos on the mantel, his soccer trophies in the hallway cabinet, his mother's quilts folded in the linen closet. Going home meant sitting in rooms that remembered him as a child, and I needed to think about him as what he'd become instead. An adversary. A thief wearing my last name. I drove north for 40 minutes until I reached a motel off Highway 99, the kind of place that rented rooms by the week to construction crews and long-haul truckers. The Skyline Motor Lodge. The sign out front had been missing the Y for at least 5 years, so it just read SK Line. The parking lot was cracked asphalt with weeds pushing through. My truck fit in next to a rusted Dodge with Montana plates and a camper shell held together with duct tape. The room cost $48 for the night. Cash. The clerk didn't ask for ID, didn't make small talk, just handed me a physical key attached to a diamond-shaped plastic fob with the room number stamped in faded gold. Room 12. The door stuck in the frame. I had to shoulder it open. Inside, the air smelled like industrial cleaning solution trying to cover decades of cigarette smoke. The carpet was brown, or maybe it had turned brown. The bedspread was polyester, rough under my palm when I tested it. A window unit air conditioner sat silent in the frame, its face yellowed with age. I dropped my duffel bag on the bed and sat at the particle board desk bolted to the wall. My laptop opened with the small click of the hinge releasing. The screen lit up, harsh white light in the dim room. I pulled up the trust documents again, but this time I went deeper, tracing the full architecture of what I'd built over 4 decades. It was all there. Every piece. Blackwood Brand Holdings owned the trademark I'd filed in 1991, 3 years before Julian was born. The trademark covered the name, the logo, the trade dress, even the specific recipes I'd developed for the signature burger blend and the proprietary sauce that every location used. The filing documents showed my name alone. No co-applicants. No shared ownership. Just Gordon Blackwood, sole proprietor. The licensing agreements came next. 17 separate contracts, one for each restaurant location. Each contract required the licensee, Blackwood Restaurant Group, Julian's entity, to pay 6% of gross revenue quarterly. Last year's total revenue across all locations had been $63.7 million. 6% of that was $3.8 million. Paid directly to my holding company. Money Julian's operational budgets never touched. Then the real estate. 4 of the 17 locations operated in buildings I owned through Cascade Property Holdings, a land trust I'd established in 2001 when property values were low and I had cash to deploy. The restaurants paid rent. Market rate. Julian signed those leases himself back in 2019 when he'd been expanding aggressively. I don't think he'd bothered to check who the landlord was. The trust documents listed me as the sole trustee with absolute discretion. On my death, control passed to Rebecca, not Julian. That had been intentional. Rebecca understood that wealth was built through systems and patience. Julian understood that wealth looked good on camera. My current liquid assets sat at $8.9 million in index funds and municipal bonds. Another $2.4 million in the real estate equity. The restaurants themselves, Julian's 32% stake, were worth maybe $30 million based on standard industry multiples. He thought he was the wealthy one. He thought I was the burger flipper barely scraping by. The temperature of my skin had changed while I worked through the numbers. My face felt hot, flushed with something that wasn't quite anger. More like clarity. The sensation you get when a complex problem suddenly resolves into simple geometry. My hands were steady on the keyboard. My breathing was even. This wasn't emotion. This was math. I leaned back in the desk chair. It creaked under my weight, the mechanism loose and worn. Through the wall I could hear a television playing, canned laughter from some sitcom. A truck passed on the highway outside, the sound of its engine rising and falling as it moved through the night. I'd let this happen. That was the truth I needed to face. I'd let Julian take credit for the brand. Let him do interviews where he talked about building the business from the ground up, never mentioning that he'd built it on top of infrastructure I'd laid decades before he had the idea. I'd let him call himself the founder, the visionary, the architect of Blackwood Restaurant Group's success. Why? The answer sat in my chest like a stone. Because he was my son. Because after his mother died, he was all I had left of the family we'd built together. Because I wanted him to feel capable, successful, proud of what he'd accomplished. I'd given him room to grow by staying invisible. I'd let him forget that I existed as anything other than the old man who still flipped burgers at the original location. The virtue trap. That's what my business partner had called it years ago, back when we were building the first expansion. You're too decent, Gordon. People will mistake kindness for weakness. And when they do, they'll take everything you don't defend. I hadn't believed him then. I'd thought integrity and generosity would be recognized, appreciated, returned in kind. But my partner had been right. Decency without boundaries wasn't virtue. It was an invitation to exploitation. Julian had accepted that invitation. The limit had been crossed the moment he brought cameras into my diner. Not to celebrate the legacy. To document my obsolescence. To build a case for removing me from the brand I'd created before he was born. That was the line. The boundary I should have drawn years ago but was drawing now. The air conditioner kicked on suddenly, rattling in its frame. Cool air began to flow, carrying the metallic smell of old ductwork. I closed the laptop and lay back on the bed, still fully dressed, my boots hanging off the end of the mattress. The ceiling had water stains in the corner, brown halos that suggested old leaks never properly repaired. My body felt heavy against the mattress. The ache in my lower back had spread to my hips. My knees throbbed with the days standing. 65 years old and my skeleton was sending me itemized bills for every shift I'd ever worked. But my mind was clear. Sharp. Focused on the next move. Tomorrow I'd go back. Not to fight. Fighting was what Julian expected. Fighting was what he could document, spin, use as more evidence of my declining judgment. No. I'd go back and play the role he'd assigned me. The confused old man. The relic who didn't understand modern business complexity. I'd let him think he was winning. Let him commit more errors. Let him document more evidence of his intentions. And when he'd gone far enough, when he'd crossed the point where retreat was impossible, I'd show him what he'd forgotten. That the quiet man behind the grill built the machine he was trying to steal. That silence isn't surrender. That old-fashioned doesn't mean obsolete. The television through the wall went quiet. The truck traffic on the highway thinned to nothing. I lay in the dark of a $48 motel room, listening to the air conditioner rattle, and planned the end of my son's career with the same methodical precision I'd used to build the beginning of it. He wanted me out of the picture. He'd get his wish. Just not the way he imagined. Thursday morning I drove back to Seattle. The traffic thickened as I approached the city, brake lights stretching ahead of me in red chains. My truck's engine had a sound it made when it worked too hard, a low grinding from somewhere deep in the transmission. I'd been meaning to get it looked at for 6 months but hadn't found the time. Or maybe I just didn't want to spend money on myself when I was busy building wealth I'd never spend. The dashboard clock read 9:42 when I pulled into the parking lot at Blackwood Prime, Julian's flagship restaurant. The building was brick and glass, 3 stories, corner location with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the waterfront. Expensive real estate. The kind of location that signaled success to customers before they ever tasted the food. What Julian didn't know, what he'd apparently never bothered to check, was that I owned the building through Cascade Property Holdings. He'd signed a 15-year lease back in 2019. Triple net. He paid property taxes, insurance, maintenance, everything. And he paid me $18,000 a month in rent. I'd watched him sign those papers in my attorney's office, proud of himself for securing such a prime location, never once asking who the landlord was. I parked in the back lot near the service entrance and sat in the truck for a moment, gathering myself. My reflection in the rearview mirror looked exactly right for the role I needed to play. Unshaven. Tired. The face of a man who was losing track of things. I'd worn the same flannel shirt from Tuesday, deliberately unwashed. It smelled like grill grease and old coffee. My jeans had a stain on the thigh from where I'd wiped my hands. My boots were scuffed, the leather cracked along the toe box. I looked like what Julian needed me to be. A man in decline. I walked through the service entrance without knocking. The kitchen staff barely glanced up. They knew me as the old man who used to run things, back before Julian turned the operation into something modern and profitable. Sous chefs worked at stainless steel stations, their movements quick and practiced. The air smelled like reduced stock and fresh herbs. Classical music played from a Bluetooth speaker mounted near the expo line, something with strings that was probably meant to keep everyone calm during service. Julian stood near the pass, reviewing tickets with his executive chef. He wore chef's whites, immaculate and pressed, though I'd never seen him actually cook on the line. The whites were costume. Theater. He looked up when he heard my footsteps and his expression shifted through surprise into something that might have been concern but read more like inconvenience. Dad. What are you doing here? I wanted to talk about those papers. My voice came out hesitant, uncertain. I kept my eyes slightly unfocused, like I was having trouble concentrating. You're probably right. About the brand evolution. Maybe it's time to step back. His face changed. The tension left his shoulders. His smile came back, the television smile, warm and professional. That's a really mature perspective, Dad. I think you'll feel better once you're not carrying all this stress. He gestured toward the back stairwell. Why don't we go up to my office? We can talk privately. I followed him up the stairs, moving slowly, gripping the handrail like I needed it for balance. My knees were genuinely stiff from standing at the grill yesterday, so the performance required minimal acting. Each step sent a small spike of pain through my kneecaps. Julian's office was on the 3rd floor. Corner space with views of Elliott Bay through windows that probably cost more than my truck. His desk was walnut, modern design, the kind with no visible hardware. Floating. His chair was leather, ergonomic, the type that adjusts in 8 directions. The walls had framed reviews from food magazines, photos of Julian with minor celebrities, a shelf displaying awards from culinary competitions. He sat behind his desk and pulled out an expanded version of the folder from Tuesday. The document stack was thicker now, maybe 50 pages. Legal-size paper. Multiple signature tabs protruding from the edges in bright yellow. I need you to understand what you're signing, Julian said. His tone had shifted into something careful, patient. The voice you use with someone whose capacity you're questioning. This transfers all brand management and operational authority to the current executive team. You'll receive a consulting fee, $60,000 annually, and maintain emeritus status. Emeritus. The word for people you put out to pasture. What about the trust? I asked. I let my forehead wrinkle with confusion. The family holdings. Those documents from before. What trust? Julian's expression was blank. Genuinely blank. He didn't know. Or he'd forgotten. Or he'd never bothered to look at the corporate structure because everything had always just worked, money flowing where it was supposed to flow, his operational budgets always funded, his expansion plans always approved. The documents from '96. I made my voice trail off, uncertain. The ones that Margaret helped me set up. Dad, I don't think you're remembering clearly. He leaned forward slightly, his elbows on the desk. We restructured everything in 2015. You signed all the operational authority over to me then. I think you're confusing old paperwork with current arrangements. I see. I picked up the pen he'd placed on the desk. Heavy. Expensive. The kind of pen that was meant to feel important in your hand. Can I take these home? My attorney should probably review them. Of course. Take all the time you need. Julian's smile was generous now. Magnanimous. He thought he'd won. The board meeting is tomorrow afternoon. 2:00 at the Consolidated Hospitality offices downtown. You don't need to attend if you'd rather not. The stress might be too much. I'll be there, I said quietly. I want to hear what they have to say. Julian's smile flickered for just a moment. A micro-expression that suggested he'd prefer I stay away. But he recovered quickly. That's fine, Dad. Whatever makes you comfortable. I stood slowly, gathering the papers. Julian came around the desk and put his hand on my shoulder. The gesture was meant to seem affectionate. Supportive. But his grip was tight. Steering. You're doing the right thing. This way you can relax, enjoy your retirement. Stop worrying about all the complexity. We'll take care of everything. His voice had that edge underneath. The edge that said, you're obsolete and we both know it. I nodded and shuffled toward the door. Turned back like I'd forgotten something. Julian, who's going to run things after the transition? He hesitated. Just for a second. Long enough for me to see him calculate what to tell me. The executive team will manage operations. But I'll maintain creative control. We're also bringing in some outside expertise. Consolidated has very sophisticated systems. They're prepared to make a substantial offer for the whole portfolio. How substantial? My voice stayed vague, unthreatening. They're proposing $340 million for complete acquisition. Julian watched my face carefully, looking for a reaction. That's roughly 30 times annual EBITDA. It's an exceptional multiple. And you'd get, I let the sentence drift off, playing confused about the math. I'd receive compensation based on my equity stake and operational role. He didn't specify the number. Didn't need to. If Consolidated was offering $340 million for the whole company, and Julian owned 32%, he was looking at around $109 million. Minus debt. Minus transaction costs. Still north of $90 million. That's good, I said. I'm glad you'll be taken care of. I left his office and walked slowly down the stairs, my hand on the rail, my steps deliberate and cautious. Behind me I could hear Julian on his phone already, his voice too low to make out words but the tone celebratory. Victorious. I walked through the kitchen and out the service entrance to my truck. Sat behind the wheel and placed the unsigned documents on the passenger seat. Then I pulled out my phone and called Margaret Chen, the attorney who'd helped me structure the trusts in '96 and had maintained my corporate filings ever since. Margaret, it's Gordon. I need you at a meeting tomorrow. 2:00. Consolidated Hospitality Group offices downtown. Bring every original document related to Blackwood Brand Holdings, Blackwood Family Trust, and Cascade Property Holdings. She was quiet for a moment. Then, what's Julian done? He's trying to sell something he doesn't own. I need you to bring proof of what actually belongs to whom. This is going to be expensive for someone, she said. I could hear the smile in her voice. Yes, I agreed. But not for us. I hung up and sat in the truck, watching the waterfront through my windshield. Seagulls circled over the water. Tourists walked along the pier, taking photos. The city moved around me, oblivious to the small war about to erupt in a conference room 24 hours from now. Julian had just committed his second irreversible error. He'd told me about the Consolidated deal. Given me the number. Admitted his plan to sell the entire company, including assets he didn't control, had never controlled, would never control. And he'd done it in his office, surrounded by his staff, during business hours. If this went to court, if it became litigation, there would be witnesses. Timestamps. Electronic records of when I'd visited, when we'd met, what had been discussed. He was building my case for me. I started the truck and drove back toward Tacoma. The afternoon light was flat and gray, typical for November in the Pacific Northwest. Rain threatened but hadn't started yet. The traffic was lighter heading south. My hands were steady on the wheel. My jaw was relaxed. My breathing was even and controlled. Tomorrow Julian would walk into that conference room thinking he was about to become wealthy beyond anything he'd imagined. Instead, he was going to learn what happens when you try to steal from someone who built the machine you're standing on. The difference between earning something and taking it. Between building a brand and wearing one. I stopped at a grocery store on the way home. Bought bread, eggs, coffee, the basic supplies I'd need for the next few days. The total came to $37.18. I paid cash. The clerk was a kid, maybe 19, with acne scars and tired eyes. He bagged my groceries without making eye contact. Minimum wage job. The kind of work where you stop seeing customers as people and start seeing them as transactions to process. I remembered that feeling. Remembered working the line at my first kitchen job when I was 17, burning my forearms on oven racks, going home smelling like fry oil, too exhausted to do anything but sleep. I'd built everything from that foundation. 43 years of work. Saving. Investing. Building systems that generated wealth while I slept. And my son thought I was just an old man who'd gotten lucky. Thought the brand had built itself. Thought success was something you could inherit without understanding how it was constructed. Tomorrow he'd learn otherwise. I drove home and parked in the driveway of my house in Tacoma. The house was small, 2 bedrooms, built in the 70s. The paint was peeling near the gutters. The lawn needed mowing. I didn't care about any of it. The house was a place to sleep between shifts. My real wealth was invisible. Numbers in accounts. Documents in filing cabinets. Systems that worked whether I paid attention to them or not. Inside, I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table with my laptop. Opened the corporate documents one more time and traced every connection, every entity, every piece of the architecture. Making sure I hadn't missed anything. Making sure tomorrow's revelation would be complete and devastating. The coffee was too strong. I'd used too many grounds. But I drank it anyway, feeling the caffeine sharpen my focus, and planned the precise sequence of how my son's world would end. Not with violence. Not with shouting. With paperwork. The most permanent form of destruction I knew. Friday morning I woke at 5:30, my internal clock calibrated to decades of opening shifts. The house was dark and cold. I made coffee in the same percolator I'd owned for 20 years, the aluminum scarred and discolored from constant use. While it brewed I stood at the kitchen window and watched dawn come up gray over Tacoma, the light struggling through cloud cover that looked like it would deliver rain by afternoon. I showered and shaved carefully, using the straight razor my father had given me when I turned 18. The handle was bone, yellowed with age. The blade required stropping before each use. I drew it across the leather strap hanging from the towel rack, feeling the edge align and sharpen. The ritual steadied my hands. Focused my mind. I dressed in clothes I hadn't worn in months. Khaki slacks. A button-down shirt, light blue, cotton, wrinkled from sitting folded in my drawer. A navy blazer that was too big in the shoulders now, bought back when I carried more weight. Brown leather shoes that I had to dust off before putting on. I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror and saw someone trying to look respectable but not quite managing it. The blazer was dated. The shirt had a small stain near the bottom button. The shoes were scuffed despite the dusting. Perfect. I looked like an old man trying to dress up for something important he didn't quite understand. Margaret Chin called at 7:15. I'm reviewing everything one more time. The structure is airtight, Gordon. Julian can't sell what he doesn't own, and he doesn't own the trademark, the recipes, or the real estate under 4 of his locations. When I present this documentation, the consolidated deal dies immediately. Good. I want copies for everyone in the room. I want them to see exactly what Julian tried to sell them. She paused. This is going to destroy him publicly. You understand that? He tried to destroy me first. My voice was flat. Empty of doubt. He brought cameras. He brought witnesses. He documented his intentions. I'm just presenting the facts. There's a difference between justice and revenge, Gordon. Not from where I'm sitting. I ended the call and finished my coffee. The clock on the microwave read 7:33. The meeting wasn't until 2. I had 6 hours to fill. I drove to Rosie's Diner and opened it for the breakfast shift. The Friday regulars came in, construction workers and retirees, people who ordered the same thing every week and paid in cash and never looked at their phones while they ate. I worked the grill in my good clothes with an apron tied over them. Flipped eggs and bacon. Made hash browns on the flat top. The familiar motions calmed the tightness in my chest that had been building since I woke. By 11 I'd served 43 customers and cleared maybe $200 in revenue. Barely worth opening. But it wasn't about the money. It was about maintaining the routine. Staying in the rhythm that had sustained me for 43 years. I closed the diner at 11:30 and drove back to Tacoma to change. The good clothes went back on without the apron. I looked at myself one more time in the mirror. Saw my father looking back at me, his face worn and serious, the expression he wore when he had to do something difficult but necessary. I arrived at the Consolidated Hospitality Group offices at 1:47. The building was downtown Seattle, 40 stories of glass and steel with a lobby that had marble floors and abstract sculptures that probably cost more than my house. A directory near the elevators listed Consolidated on floors 38 through 40. I took the elevator up, watching the numbers climb, feeling the pressure change in my ears as I rose. Margaret was waiting in the 38th floor reception area. She wore a charcoal suit, tailored and professional, and carried a leather briefcase that looked heavy. She'd brought everything. Gordon. She stood when she saw me. Ready? I nodded. The receptionist led us to a conference room at the end of a long hallway. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city. Puget Sound was visible in the distance, gray water under gray sky. The conference table was glass and chrome, long enough to seat 20 people. Julian was already there. He wore a different suit today, darker, with a thin tie and a pocket square that matched. His hair was styled with product that made it look effortlessly perfect. He stood talking with a woman in her 50s, blonde hair pulled back, expensive watch, the bearing of someone used to making 8-figure decisions. Behind them were 4 other people I didn't recognize, the Consolidated team. And at the far end of the table sat 2 men I did recognize, board members from Blackwood Restaurant Group, appointed during Julian's expansion phase. One was a former restaurant consultant. The other was a private equity investor. Both owed their positions to Julian. Dad. Julian's face showed surprise that shifted quickly into something else. Concern maybe. Or calculation. I'm glad you made it. His voice was warm for the audience. Come sit down. We have a lot to discuss. I moved slowly to a chair near the middle of the table. Margaret sat beside me and placed her briefcase on the floor, still closed. Julian returned to his conversation with the blonde woman, his voice dropping to a murmur I couldn't hear. But his body language was relaxed. Confident. He thought this was a formality. Let's begin. The blonde woman, who I now understood was Patricia Drummond based on the nameplate in front of her seat, activated a screen at the front of the room. A presentation appeared. Consolidated Hospitality Group and Blackwood Restaurant Group, Strategic Acquisition Proposal. The presentation was polished. Lots of graphs and market analysis and projected revenue growth. Patricia walked through it with the practiced ease of someone who'd done 100 similar acquisitions. Consolidated was offering $340 million for complete acquisition of Blackwood Restaurant Group and all associated brand assets. The deal included trademark, recipes, operational systems, customer databases, real estate holdings, everything. Integration would happen over 18 months. The Blackwood name would be maintained initially, then gradually transitioned to Consolidated Blackwood, then eventually absorbed entirely into the Consolidated family of brands. Julian interjected throughout the presentation with insights and clarifications. He was performing again, demonstrating his value to the Consolidated team. Showing them he understood the business deeply. That he was worth keeping on in some leadership capacity post-acquisition. The board members nodded along, occasionally asking questions about valuation multiples or integration costs. No one asked me anything. I was decorative. The founder being honored with a seat at the table where his life's work was being sold off. At 2:39, Patricia turned to face me directly. Mr. Blackwood, Gordon, we want to honor your founding contribution to this brand. Julian has arranged for you to receive a lifetime consulting fee and recognition as founder emeritus. We understand you'll be signing the legacy transition documents today. The room went quiet. Everyone looked at me. Julian's expression was encouraging. Supportive. The look you give someone when you're helping them through something difficult. I'm not signing those documents, I said. My voice was quiet but clear. Carried across the conference room without echo. Julian's smile froze. Dad, we discussed this. You agreed that the brand evolution was necessary. I agreed to come to this meeting. I turned to Margaret. Please distribute the materials. Margaret opened her briefcase and removed 17 folders, each one dark blue with gold embossing. Blackwood Family Holdings. She stood and placed one in front of each person at the table, moving with deliberate precision. The room had gone completely silent. "What is this?" Patricia asked. Her voice had lost its warmth. "Corporate structure documentation," Margaret said. "Specifically, the trust instruments, trademark ownership records, and licensing agreements that constitute the actual legal foundation of Blackwood Restaurant Group." Julian grabbed his folder and opened it. His hands were shaking slightly. The confident performance had vanished. His face was pale, bloodless, the color draining as he read the first page. "You don't own the Blackwood brand trademark." Patricia's voice had gone flat. "Factual." She was reading from the documents in front of her, her finger tracing down the page. "The trademark is owned by Blackwood Brand Holdings, a Washington limited liability company established in 1996. Managing member, Gordon Blackwood, with sole authority." She flipped to the next page. "All 17 restaurants operate under licensing agreements requiring 6% of gross revenue paid annually to the trademark holder. Last year that amounted to $3.8 million in licensing fees." She looked up at Julian. "You've been paying your father to use his brand." Julian was reading frantically now, flipping through pages, his breathing shallow and quick. "This can't be right. We restructured in 2015. I have operational authority." "You have operational authority over Blackwood Restaurant Group," Margaret said. "Which is a separate entity from Blackwood Brand Holdings. You operate restaurants. Gordon owns what makes them Blackwood restaurants." "Furthermore," she continued, pulling out property documents and distributing additional pages, 4 of your 17 locations operate in buildings owned by Cascade Property Holdings, a land trust controlled by Gordon Blackwood. You've been paying rent to your father. Annual rent totals $437,000 across all 4 properties." One of the board members stood up abruptly. His chair scraped against the floor. "I wasn't informed of this structure. If the trademark isn't part of our assets, our valuation is completely wrong." Patricia was conferring with her legal counsel in urgent whispers. Her expression had hardened into something cold and professional. She turned to Julian with the look of someone who'd just discovered fraud. "Mr. Blackwood, these licensing agreements include termination clauses. If the trademark holder determines the brand is being misrepresented or damaged, he can revoke your license to operate under the Blackwood name. Have you attempted to transfer trademark ownership without authorization? This is insane." Julian's voice cracked. "He's a burger flipper at a roadside diner. He doesn't understand modern business complexity. You can't just, this isn't how it works. I built this company. I grew it from 4 locations to 17. I created the value Consolidated wants to buy." "You created operational value," I said. My voice was still quiet. "But you created it using my trademark, my recipes, my real estate, and my capital structure. You built your success on top of infrastructure I laid 30 years before you had the idea." Julian stood up. His chair fell backward and hit the floor. His face had gone from pale to flushed, red creeping up his neck. "You're sabotaging me. You're destroying everything I've built because you can't stand that I outgrew you. I'm presenting facts." I gestured to the documents in front of everyone. "You tried to sell assets you don't own. You brought cameras into my diner to document my supposed incompetence. You plan to remove me from the brand and pocket $100 million from a deal that couldn't legally close." Patricia Drummond closed her folder. "Consolidated Hospitality Group withdraws our acquisition offer. This transaction cannot proceed without clear trademark ownership and unencumbered asset transfer." She stood. Her team stood with her. "Mr. Blackwood, your legal counsel will be hearing from our firm regarding material misrepresentation in these negotiations." She meant Julian. She walked out. Her team followed. The conference room door closed behind them with a soft click that sounded like a vault ceiling. The 2 board members were gathering their materials, avoiding eye contact with Julian. One of them, the private equity investor, stopped at the door. "I'll be recommending the board remove you as managing director, Julian. This is either gross negligence or deliberate fraud. Either way, you're done. They left. The conference room was empty except for Julian, Margaret, and me. Julian stood at the head of the table, his expensive suit suddenly looking like costume, his styled hair and pocket square absurd against the reality of what had just happened. His hands were shaking. His breathing was ragged. "Dad, please." His voice broke. "We're family. We can work this out. I was trying to build something bigger than both of us." "You were trying to erase me," I said. "The licensing agreements terminate in 30 days. You can renegotiate at 12% of gross revenue, or you can rebrand every location and develop your own recipes and find new buildings for the 4 locations on my property. Your choice." 12%. Julian's voice was barely a whisper. "That's double what I pay now. That's commercially unreasonable. It's generous considering you just committed trademark fraud in front of witnesses." Margaret stood and gathered her materials. She looked at Julian without sympathy. "You tried to sell your father's life's work out from under him. You're lucky he's only asking for 12%. She walked to the door. "I'll have the revised licensing agreements drawn up by Monday. You have until end of business Tuesday to sign them or the current agreements terminate Wednesday at midnight." She left. Julian and I were alone in the conference room. The city stretched out below us through the windows. Traffic moved on the streets. People went about their lives. None of them knew that in this glass room 40 stories above them, a son had just learned what it cost to betray his father. "I'm your son," Julian said. He was crying now. Tears running down his face. Destroying his television-ready composure. "That's why I'm not pursuing criminal charges," I replied. "But try to steal from me again and I'll remind you what else I built before you learned to walk. A legal system that doesn't care about family sentiment." I stood and walked to the door. Stopped. Turned back. Julian was still standing at the head of the table, surrounded by folders full of evidence of his failure. "You wanted me out of the picture," I said. "You wanted to prove I was obsolete. So here's what obsolete looks like. It looks like the men who built the machine you're standing on. The men who knows where all the switches are. The men who can turn off your power with a signature." I left him there. The elevator descended in silence. Margaret and I didn't speak. There was nothing left to say. The math had been done. The verdict delivered. The consequences set in motion. Outside, the rain had started. Cold November rain that turned Seattle's streets dark and slick. I walked to my truck and sat behind the wheel, watching water stream down the windshield. My hands were steady. My breathing was even. I felt nothing except the quiet satisfaction of a problem correctly solved. Tomorrow Julian would have to decide whether to accept my terms or lose everything. Either way, he'd learned the lesson I should have taught him years ago. That silence isn't weakness. That old-fashioned doesn't mean powerless. That the quiet man flipping burgers might own the ground you're standing on. I started the truck and drove home through the rain. Tuesday morning I opened Rosie's Diner at 6 and worked the breakfast shift like nothing had changed. Eggs over easy. Hash browns. Coffee refills. The regulars came in and ordered their usual and I cooked it the same way I'd cooked it for 20 years. My hands moved through the familiar patterns. Crack eggs on the flat top edge. Flip bacon when the edges curl. Press hash browns flat so they crisp evenly. The muscle memory operated independent of thought. My mind was elsewhere, running calculations, tracking the hours until Julian's deadline. The revised licensing agreements had arrived in my email at 8:17 Monday night. Margaret had worked through the weekend to draft them. 12% of gross revenue instead of 6. Immediate termination clauses if Julian attempted any further unauthorized use of the trademark. Personal guarantees that made him individually liable for any breach. And a reversion clause that gave me the option to buy back his 32% equity stake at book value if he defaulted on any payment. Book value meant the assets minus liabilities on the balance sheet. Maybe $12 million. A fraction of what his stake was actually worth. The deadline was today at 5. If Julian didn't sign, his current licensing agreements terminated at midnight and all 17 restaurants would be operating illegally under my trademark starting Wednesday morning. He'd have to rebrand everything. New names. New menus. New recipes. Starting from zero while still carrying all his debt and overhead. It would bankrupt him within 6 months. At 11:30 a truck pulled into the diner's parking lot. Not Julian's Tesla. A Ford pickup, older model, primer gray on the front quarter panel where someone had done bodywork but never finished painting. Julian climbed out. He was wearing jeans and a sweatshirt. No suit. No styled hair. He looked like he hadn't slept. Dark circles under his eyes. Stubble on his jaw. The careful polish stripped away to reveal something raw underneath. He walked into the diner and stood near the counter. The breakfast rush was over. 2 customers sat in the corner booth, construction workers on their lunch break. They glanced up when Julian entered but went back to their food. I was wiping down the grill. I didn't turn around. I heard him breathing behind me. Shallow breaths. The sound of someone trying to hold themselves together. Dad. His voice was rough. Damaged. I need to talk to you. I set down my cleaning rag and turned. Up close he looked worse. His eyes were red. His hands were shaking. The sweatshirt had a stain on the front, coffee maybe, like he'd been drinking it too fast and spilled. I'm listening. You're destroying me. The words came out broken. The board voted yesterday to remove me as managing director. Consolidated is threatening to sue for fraudulent misrepresentation. My reputation is ruined. Every investor I've ever worked with has heard what happened. No one will return my calls. You did that to yourself, I said. You brought cameras into my diner to document my incompetence. You tried to sell my trademark without my authorization. You told your sister I needed a competency evaluation. Every move you made was designed to erase me so you could pocket money that didn't belong to you. I was building something. Julian's voice broke. I was trying to create real value. On my foundation. Using my brand. In my buildings. I kept my voice level. You built well, Julian. I'm proud of what you accomplished operationally. But you forgot who owned the infrastructure. And when I didn't move fast enough out of your way, you tried to remove me by force. The 2 customers in the corner booth were watching now. Not even pretending to eat. Just staring at the father and son having a public breakdown in a roadside diner. Julian's face was wet. He was crying again, not bothering to hide it. Please. I'll sign the new licensing agreements. 12% is brutal but I'll make it work. Just don't invoke the reversion clause. Don't take away my equity stake. It's all I have left. I studied his face. Saw my son. Saw the boy I'd taught to crack eggs when he was 8 years old. Saw the teenager who'd worked his first summer in my kitchen, complaining about the heat and the grease burns and the minimum wage I paid him. Saw the young man who'd come to me with a business plan for expansion, his eyes bright with ambition and confidence. And I saw what he'd become. Someone who'd looked at his father and seen only an obstacle. Someone who'd calculated that erasing me was worth more than honoring me. Someone who'd brought witnesses to document my decline so he could steal what I'd built. The tightness in my chest wasn't anger. Anger was hot. This was cold. This was the absence of feeling. The shutting down of circuits that had once carried love and now carried only assessment. You have until 5 to sign, I said. After that the current agreements terminate and you're operating without authorization. I picked up my cleaning rag and turned back to the grill. Behind me I heard Julian make a sound. Not words. Just a sound. Something animal and wounded. Then footsteps. The door chiming. The truck engine starting and pulling away. I wiped down the grill in long smooth strokes. The steel gleamed under the fluorescent lights. Clean. Orderly. Maintained. One of the construction workers approached the counter to pay his bill. He set down cash, exact change plus a tip. He looked at me with something in his eyes. Sympathy maybe. Or recognition. That was hard, he said quietly. Had to be done. I took his money and nodded. He left. The diner was empty. I locked the front door and flipped the sign to closed. Walked to the back office and sat at my desk. My laptop showed an empty inbox. No email from Margaret. No signed agreements. The office was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerators in the kitchen. The clock on the wall showed 12:17. 4 hours and 43 minutes until the deadline. I made coffee in the ancient percolator I kept on the filing cabinet. While it brewed, I opened my banking app and checked the account balances. Blackwood Brand Holdings had just received the quarterly licensing payment. $962,000. 6% of last quarter's revenue across all 17 locations. The last payment I'd receive at the old rate. After today it would be double. Or it would be nothing because Julian would have lost the right to use my brand entirely. The coffee finished brewing. I poured a cup and sat back down. Opened the trust documents and reviewed the reversion clause one more time. If Julian defaulted on any payment, or operated without proper authorization, I could exercise my option to purchase his equity stake at book value within 30 days. Margaret had valued his 32% at $12.3 million based on the most recent balance sheet. I had enough liquid assets to write that check today. If I invoked the clause, I'd own the entire restaurant group. All 17 locations. 100% control. I could sell it myself to Consolidated or a competitor. Could bring in professional management and collect dividends. Could liquidate the whole operation and retire on the proceeds. Or I could let Julian keep his stake. Let him rebuild under the new terms. Give him the chance to prove he understood the lesson. That wealth is built on systems and respect. That erasing the people who built the foundation is a sure path to collapse. My phone rang at 4:32. Margaret Chen. Gordon, I just received the signed agreements. Julian executed them 10 minutes ago. 12% terms accepted. Personal guarantees signed. He's agreed to everything. I closed my eyes. Felt something loosen in my chest. Relief maybe. Or disappointment. I wasn't sure which. Thank you, Margaret. File them with the corporate records. What about the reversion clause? Do you want to invoke it? Anyway. You have the right based on his attempted fraud. No. I'll let him keep his equity. He'll pay the increased licensing fees and work under the new terms. Maybe he'll learn something. Maybe, she said. But she sounded doubtful. People who think silence is weakness rarely learn otherwise until they've lost everything. We'll see. I ended the call and sat in the quiet office. Through the wall I could hear traffic passing on the county road. The world moving forward like always. Indifferent to the small wars fought in diners and conference rooms. Julian would survive. He'd pay double what he used to pay, but he'd maintain his operational control. He'd keep his title, his restaurants, his reduced but still substantial equity stake. He'd lost the Consolidated deal and his reputation had taken damage, but he was young enough to rebuild. Smart enough to recover if he learned from this. But he'd never look at me the same way again. Never see the burger flipper. Never mistake my silence for weakness. Never forget that the quiet man behind the grill owned the machine he was standing on. I finished my coffee and washed the cup in the small sink in the corner. Dried it and put it back on the shelf. Turned off the lights and locked the office. Walked through the dark kitchen to the front door. Outside, the afternoon light was fading. November dusk coming early. The parking lot was empty except for my truck. I stood for a moment looking at the diner. Rosie's. Named after my wife who died 12 years ago. The sign was faded. The building needed paint. The parking lot had cracks that would need filling before winter ice made them worse. But it was mine. Paid off. Profitable in a modest way. The foundation of everything else I'd built. I climbed into my truck and drove home. The radio played classic rock, songs from the 70s that I'd heard 10,000 times. I didn't sing along. Just listened and drove and thought about what I'd done. Destroying your own son's dreams, even when he deserved it, even when he'd tried to destroy you first, still felt like failure. Like I'd missed something crucial in his upbringing. Some lesson about respect and gratitude and understanding where your success actually came from. But maybe some lessons can only be learned through loss. Through the experience of reaching for something that isn't yours and having your hand slapped away hard enough to leave marks. Maybe Julian needed to feel what it was like to lose everything before he could appreciate what he still had. At home I made dinner. Nothing fancy. Grilled cheese sandwich and tomato soup from a can. I ate at the kitchen table with my laptop open, reviewing the signed agreements one more time. Everything was in order. Margaret had done clean work. The terms were clear and enforceable. Julian would pay or he'd lose everything. Simple. Final. No room for negotiation. After dinner I sat in my living room and looked at the photos on the mantel. Julian at 8 years old, gap-toothed and sunburned from a camping trip. Julian at 16 in his soccer uniform. Julian at 22, college graduation, his arm around his mother who would die 3 years later. Photos of a boy I'd loved. A son I'd been proud of. Before he'd decided I was an obstacle instead of a foundation. I went to bed at 9 and lay in the dark, listening to the house settle around me. My body ached in all the familiar places. Lower back. Knees. Shoulders. 65 years of standing and lifting and working. The physical cost of building something that would outlast me. But I'd won. I'd defended what was mine. I'd proved that old-fashioned didn't mean powerless. That silence wasn't surrender. That the quiet man could still bite when cornered. So why did victory taste like ash in my mouth? Why did I feel like I'd lost something irreplaceable even as I'd protected everything I'd built? I closed my eyes and waited for sleep that wouldn't come easily. 3 weeks later I stood at the same grill at Rosie's Diner, flipping burgers during the Tuesday lunch rush. The flat top held its temperature exactly where I'd calibrated it decades ago. The exhaust fan rattled overhead. The coffee carafe was full and fresh. I'd made $843 in gross sales by 2 in the afternoon, which would net around $190 in profit after food costs and labor. My phone sat face up on the steel counter beside the grill, screen lit with a notification. Wire transfer received. $387,000. The monthly licensing fee from Blackwood Restaurant Group. 12% of last month's gross revenue across all 17 locations. Julian had signed the new agreements on that Tuesday afternoon at 4:32, 28 minutes before the deadline. Since then the money had flowed exactly as the contract specified. Every payment on time. No communication. No calls. No visits. Just wire transfers landing in my account with mechanical precision, stripped of any relationship beyond creditor and debtor. The real estate rent had come through as well. $36,417, split across the 4 properties Julian operated in my buildings. The money would compound in my index funds. Grow while I slept. Eventually transfer to Rebecca, who would use it to fund civil rights litigation instead of luxury vehicles or television appearances or whatever Julian would have spent it on. I'd heard through Margaret that the board had reinstated Julian as managing director after a probationary period. He'd kept his operational role but lost his untouchable status. Lost the mystique of being the genius chef who'd built an empire from nothing. Now everyone knew the truth. He'd built it on top of infrastructure his father owned. He'd succeeded because someone else had laid the foundation and he'd been allowed to build on it. The consolidated deal was dead. Other potential acquirers had heard what happened and walked away. No one wanted to buy a restaurant group that didn't own its own brand. That operated on licenses that could be terminated if the trademark holder decided the brand was being misused. Julian's net worth had probably dropped by $70 million overnight. From $100 million on paper to maybe 30. Still wealthy by any reasonable standard. Still successful. But diminished. Limited. Operating under terms he didn't control. A customer approached the counter. Woman in her 50s wearing medical scrubs, probably on break from the clinic down the road. She ordered a cheeseburger with grilled onions and a side of fries. I wrote the order on the pad I'd been using for 15 years, the cardboard backing soft and pilled from constant handling. Walked back to the grill and started cooking. The burger would take 4 minutes at proper temperature. The onions needed 2 minutes to caramelize. I'd done this sequence tens of thousands of times. Could do it blind. Could do it with my mind elsewhere, running through financial projections or maintenance schedules or the slow arithmetic of compound interest building wealth while my hands flipped meat. The physical work had a rhythm that thinking work didn't. A beginning and end. A clear standard of done. The burger cooked or it didn't. The customer was satisfied or they weren't. Simple feedback loops. Unlike family relationships which operated in fog and ambiguity and unspoken expectations that could detonate years after they'd been planted. I assembled the burger with the same precision I used on every order. Bottom bun. Burger. Cheese while the patty was still hot enough to melt it. Grilled onions. Top bun. Wrapped in wax paper. Placed in a red plastic basket with the fries. Handed it to the customer who paid with a 20. I made change from the register. She left a $2 tip in the jar by the napkin dispenser and took her food to a booth by the window. I wiped down the grill and waited for the next order. Through the front window I could see the county road. Traffic moving past. People going about their lives. None of them knew that the old man flipping burgers in the roadside diner collected more in monthly licensing fees than most of them would earn in 5 years. That the stained apron and scuffed boots hid wealth they'd never accumulate. That silence and invisibility were choices, not circumstances. My body ached in all the expected places. Lower back tight from standing. Knees sending small signals of pain with each shift in weight. Shoulder stiff from the repetitive motion of the spatula work. 65 years old and every joint kept detailed records of the mileage I'd put on this frame. But my hands were steady. My mind was clear. I owned the building I stood in. Owned the trademark on the restaurants my son operated. Owned the real estate under 4 of his locations. Owned 68% of the parent company. Collected fees that would compound into wealth that would outlive me by generations. I'd won completely. So why did the victory still taste like ash? Why did I feel the absence of something I couldn't name every time I saw Julian's wire transfers land in my account with no message attached? The door chimed. I looked up expecting another customer. Julian stood in the doorway. He wore jeans and a plain black t-shirt. No logo. No designer labels. His hair was unsteeled, just combed back wet from a shower. He looked thinner than 3 weeks ago. The softness gone from his face. Replaced by something harder. More defined. He walked to the counter and stood where he'd stood 3 weeks ago when he begged me not to invoke the reversion clause. But his posture was different now. Shoulders back. Head up. Not defeated. Not broken. Just present. I came to tell you something, he said. His voice was steady. I looked at him and waited. I was wrong. The words came out clear. No qualification. No excuse. I tried to erase you from the brand because I wanted to believe I'd built it myself. I wanted the story to be that I was the genius who created something from nothing. Having you in the background complicated that narrative. Made me look like I'd inherited success instead of earned it. So I tried to remove you. And I was willing to destroy you to do it. I set down my spatula. Kept my hands visible on the counter. Didn't speak. I brought cameras into your diner to document your obsolescence, Julian continued. I told my sister you needed a competency evaluation. I planned to sell your trademark without your authorization and pocket money that didn't belong to me. I did all of that because I thought you were weak. Because I mistook your silence for inability. Because I assumed that someone working a grill in a roadside diner couldn't possibly understand modern business complexity. He paused. Swallowed. His throat worked with the effort of pushing words past whatever resistance he felt. I was wrong about all of it. You built a system that generates millions in passive income while you flip burgers. You structured everything so precisely that I couldn't steal it even when I tried. You let me succeed on your foundation and then reminded me who owned the ground I was standing on. That's not weakness. That's mastery. The diner was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerators. The woman in the corner booth was watching us over her burger. I'm not asking you to reduce the licensing fees, Julian said. I'm not asking for forgiveness or reconciliation. I'm just telling you that I understand now what I didn't understand before. That old-fashioned doesn't mean obsolete. That silence isn't surrender. That the men flipping burgers might own everything you think you control. He turned to leave. Stopped. Looked back. I'm going to rebuild my reputation. Going to make Blackwood Restaurant Group worth what it should have been worth if I hadn't tried to sell it out from under you. And every month when I pay that licensing fee, I'm going to remember that I'm paying rent on success I didn't build alone. He walked out. The door chimed behind him. Through the window I watched him climb into his truck and drive away. The tightness in my chest that had been there for 3 weeks loosened. Not gone completely, but reduced. Manageable. The space where it had been filling with something else. Not forgiveness exactly. More like recognition. He'd understood the lesson. Late. At great cost. But he'd understood. Some people never do. They spend their whole lives blaming others for their failures, never recognizing their own role in creating the consequences they face. Julian had looked at what happened and seen his own choices. His own mistakes. That was something. Maybe not reconciliation. Not yet. But acknowledgement. Foundation. The beginning of something that might eventually rebuild into a relationship based on reality instead of illusion. I went back to work. Another customer came in. Then another. The lunch rush continued. I cooked and served and cleaned and collected money and made change. The same routine I'd followed for 43 years. But the weight was different now. Lighter somehow. The money would keep coming. The licensing fees and the rent payments and the compound interest. The systems I'd built would continue generating wealth whether I paid attention or not. Whether Julian and I ever spoke again or not. Whether anyone understood what I'd constructed or not. I'd proved what I needed to prove. That silence isn't weakness. That old-fashioned doesn't mean powerless. That the man behind the grill knows exactly where all the switches are and can turn off your power with a signature. At 5 I closed the diner. Locked the front door and wiped down the grill one last time. Turned off the lights. Walked to my truck through the parking lot. The evening air was cold. November in the Pacific Northwest. Gray and damp and smelling like rain that would come later. I sat behind the wheel and looked at the diner through my windshield. Rosie's. The sign faded and worn. The building needing paint. The foundation solid as the day I'd poured it in 1987. Everything else could change. Could be renovated or replaced or improved. But the foundation remained. Permanent. Weight-bearing. Essential. I'd been the foundation for Julian's success. And when he'd tried to build without acknowledging that foundation, the structure had collapsed. Simple physics. Simple justice. The kind of math that doesn't care about feelings or family or good intentions. I started the truck and drove home through the gathering dark. Made dinner. Grilled chicken and steamed vegetables. Nothing fancy. Ate at the kitchen table while reviewing the monthly financial statements on my laptop. The numbers were exactly where they should be. Income up. Expenses stable. Net worth increasing. Everything functioning according to design. After dinner I sat in my living room and looked at the photos on the mantel. Julian at 8. At 16. At 22 with his mother. Photos of someone I'd loved who'd become someone I barely recognized who was now becoming someone new. Someone harder. Someone who'd learned what it cost to mistake kindness for weakness. Maybe we'd rebuild. Maybe the monthly wire transfers would eventually include a message. A phone call. A visit that wasn't an emergency or a confrontation. Maybe. But if not, I'd built something that would outlast both of us. A system that worked. A foundation that held. A lesson about respect and gratitude and understanding where your success actually comes from. I went to bed at 9 and fell asleep quickly. No tightness in my chest. No questions about whether I'd done the right thing. Just the quiet satisfaction of a problem solved correctly. The understanding that justice delivered efficiently is more permanent than revenge delivered hot. Tomorrow I'd open the diner at 6. Flip burgers. Serve coffee. collect modest daily revenue while the real money flowed invisibly through wire transfers and compound interest. And if anyone looked at me, they'd see an old man working a grill in a roadside diner. They'd never know what I owned, what I controlled, what I could take away with a single signature. That was exactly how I wanted it. Silence isn't weakness. It's camouflage. The predator stays quiet until the prey makes a fatal error. Then strikes once. Precisely. With enough force that the lesson never needs repeating. Julian had learned. The hard way. The only way that matters. And now we'd both live with the consequences of the education I'd been forced to provide. Him paying rent on success he didn't build alone. Me collecting fees on a brand I'd created before he was born. Both of us understanding finally that family doesn't exempt you from the rules. That betrayal has a price. That the foundation determines everything else you build on top of it. I closed my eyes and let sleep take me. The house was quiet. The world outside continued its indifferent rotation. And somewhere in Seattle, my son was learning to build on a foundation he finally understood he didn't own. That was enough. That was justice. That was the only ending this story could have.